I'm going to go into some detail, but before I do, I think it's right to reflect where we're coming from. It's now over 40 years since the United Kingdom joined the European community, then the European Union. And of course, we had a referendum shortly after we joined, which gave a 2-to-1 majority for staying in the European community. 66%, I think, voted yes. We all know when the referendum takes place, it's going to be a lot closer, and I don't know what the outcome of that will be, but I think to a large extent, to a very large extent, it will be influenced, if not determined, by the success of these negotiations. It's not unreasonable in a democracy that almost half a century after you join an institution, you reflect as to the value of that decision, whether it's made sense, whether it still makes sense, not just for Britain. It would apply to any country to have such an internal debate, and indeed we are seeing throughout Europe, in the countries of all my colleagues around this table, there are similar debates, although the issue of departing Europe is not itself on the table. I think it's helpful, at least I hope it will be helpful, just to start off where the United Kingdom's coming from. We don't question, I certainly don't question, I don't think the British government questions, the value of the European Union, including the United Kingdom as a member of that European Union, in historic terms. It's a unique creation, the result of 2 world wars emanating from our continent, and the realization that at least part of the reason for Europe is the determination to prevent that happening again. That is as relevant for the United Kingdom as it is for France, for Germany, or for other countries. We were participants in both those wars. We lost many people. Our own island was almost invaded. All the catastrophes involved applied to all of us. And of course, Europe remains a country which has divisions, partly because of Russia's policy, which we're all familiar with. So we cannot take for granted that the old divisions within Europe have disappeared. The second general point I want to make is that nor should my colleagues assume that the United Kingdom is always and has a sort of knee-jerk reaction to European integration or giving up national control of certain responsibilities. Just to give an example of what I mean, I was Europe Minister under Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was one of the great champions, as we all know, of the single market, one of the greatest achievements of the European community. And the single market wasn't just free trade. It was a market in trade and services, and it required majority voting, which Margaret Thatcher supported, in order to bring it into fruition. Let me give another example outside the EU, but in NATO, the United Kingdom has found it easier than France, historically, in giving up national control to international bodies in regard to the defense of Europe through the NATO alliance. So we don't have a knee-jerk reaction that automatically says supranational control or international integration is wrong. But we do take the view, one other point, if I may, on this before I move on. Also, it's a mistake to believe that this referendum we're having is simply the British Prime Minister's response to internal problems within the Conservative Party. It is not just an internal Conservative problem, though that does exist, I don't doubt it and deny it for a moment. But the United Kingdom as a whole is deeply divided on the question of Europe, and it must be healthy that this matter is resolved in the way that is fundamental in a democratic society by the people of the United Kingdom taking a decision as to the future of their country. Now, that's not just a British debate. There are debates taking place in many European countries, and they've become much more intense on these issues, with new political parties being formed, whether it's or existing parties, whether in France or in Germany or in other European countries. So let me move to the specifics of this current negotiation. And what the Prime Minister, David Cameron, has done is set up what are realistic but also significant and substantial requirements that will help us conclude that our future should remain within the European Union. And these were spelled out in the letter to Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. Let me take briefly through the 4 points that were raised in that letter. First of all, on the question of the Eurozone and the relationship between the Eurozone and those countries that are not in the Eurozone area, either because they don't wish to be or because they are not eligible for membership, and in many cases may not be eligible for a long time to come. I don't think anyone in the United Kingdom wants to interfere in how the Eurozone regulates itself. That is a matter for Eurozone members, and it's none of our business, nor should it be, to tell the Eurozone how it operates. However, and it's a very big however, we have a large number of countries that are not in the Eurozone, not just the United Kingdom. 9 members of the European Union are not Eurozone member states, and they have fundamental interests to the same degree as Eurozone members if the Eurozone is contemplating action that has wider implications than the Eurozone and affects the European Union as a whole. And the single greatest fear that I have, and I think it's a legitimate fear, is that we normally have, as a qualified majority, the requirement for 65% to vote for a particular proposal. The Eurozone countries cumulatively represent 66.64% of voting power within the European Union as a whole. And therefore it is entirely possible, either deliberately or unconsciously, for Eurozone countries, now and in the future, to caucus, to reach their own preliminary view on some matter, present it to the European Union as a whole, but effectively have already decided the matter in their own interests. And if that happened in a way that affected the single market as a whole, that is gravely damaging to the integrity of the single market and utterly unacceptable, not just to the United Kingdom, but to all 9 countries that are not in the Eurozone area. And this is not just a theoretical or hypothetical problem. I can give you already a couple of examples where it's already been happening. For example, there was it went through a European Union-wide bailout fund for Greece because of Greece's Eurozone problems, but the EU as a whole was required to finance this. Likewise, there's already pressure for the clearing of euros to have to be in a Eurozone country. At the moment, most of it is in London. Not because London demands it, but because London appears to be more competitive than any other financial center for attracting this business. And in a single market, that is how it should operate. So these are not just theoretical problems, they're real problems. And we have argued that there has to be a recognition that on anything involving the single market, it cannot just be the Eurozone countries that happen to have the qualified majority that can determine what happens. There has to be consensus, and there has to be a procedure for ensuring that we get consensus on any proposals. Secondly, on the question of deepening the single market, cutting bureaucracy, linked to the question of the enhanced role for national parliaments, our starting point is, first of all, that there is and everyone recognizes this, again, it's not a particularly British problem, there is a real burden on businesses and industry from the nature of European regulation. Everyone agrees that, pays lip service to it. We do not yet have binding action plan, binding route map to reduce that burden. And the crucial requirement in our negotiation, and it ought to appeal to most of my colleagues around the table, is that it must be binding not just on the member states, but on the Commission as well, to reduce that burden in a specific way that should be spelt out, which we can all reach agreement. So far as national parliaments are concerned, it may be an uncomfortable thing to say, but they have more democratic legitimacy in the eyes of the public. I'm not making a theoretical point or a philosophical point. So far as the public are concerned, it has been worked out that on average, in the European Union as a whole, there is a 25% greater turnout, 25 percentage points greater turnout to vote in national elections than in European Parliament elections. And that speaks for itself as to the relevance of national parliaments. But at the moment, they have only a cursory involvement in European matters. There are various fig leaves that are given, but nothing that creates a substance of power. And what we believe, and I think a number of other member states believe, is that the member states, the national parliaments, a threshold, we would argue of somewhere around about 35% of national parliaments, if they object to a proposal, should be able to insist on consensus in the European Union as a whole if these proposals were to go forward. Let me mention ever closer union, the third of the objectives, and the matters of that kind. Now, in one sense, there shouldn't be an issue about ever closer union, because if you look at the text, and all my colleagues will be already aware of this, it refers to the ever closer union of the peoples of Europe, not of the states or the governments. And that sounds, therefore, a very friendly apple pie aspiration, and nothing that is threatening, and who could possibly disagree with that? We have raised this, however, as an issue, I think legitimately so, because in practice, it not only keeps appearing in the treaties, but there is occasions when the European Court of Justice or others have used it to try and justify integration where it might not otherwise be seen as worthy. I think it was the Dutch foreign minister, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, who said the days of ever closer union are over. We should realize that and act accordingly. So we believe, so far as the United Kingdom is concerned, other European countries might have a similar interest. We should make it abundantly clear there is no binding obligation on any member state to accept the principle of greater integration. I said earlier that we were not automatically against integration. The judgment we make is if it can be demonstrated that integration, more integration, will lead either to greater security or prosperity or an enhancement in our quality of life, then we are prepared to share sovereignty or surrender sovereignty, as we did on the single market, as we have done in NATO with regard to defense. But what we are not attracted by, and I think this applies, if not to other governments, it certainly applies to many people around Europe, is to argue that more Europe, that awful phrase, automatically is good and less Europe is bad. Because it's the point I was making a few moments ago, that in terms of our electorate, all of our electorates are more interested in their national parliaments providing legitimacy and providing democratic accountability. It has not yet been possible to provide that to the same degree in European states. Let me finally turn to obviously what is the most difficult issue, and that is the issue of whether those who are enjoying and will continue to enjoy free movement of people around the European Union should be entitled to welfare benefits within 4 years of them arriving in this case, the United Kingdom. Other countries may have a similar interest. And here, my Prime Minister has already moved. The original proposal was to cap the number of people who could come to the United Kingdom. And we accept that under the free movement, that would simply not be tolerable. So what we're talking about is welfare benefit entitlement. And it's worth pointing out that welfare is not a subject of European Union competence. Welfare is a national issue determined in each member state according to its own national view, its own national parliament's willingness to legislate. So the issue only arises because welfare has been linked to free movement. And if I'm told that it's not possible to divorce it legally, then all right, then the requirement either is to change the law to make it possible, because welfare was never expected to be a matter of European competence, certainly not now or in the foreseeable future. And as an alternative, there may be other ways in which we can achieve the same objective. I would ask my colleagues not to underestimate the importance of this in our referendum. What our opinion polls have indicated is that as many as 9% of the electorate will change their, or would change their vote from staying in to leaving if there's not some satisfactory outcome on a matter of this kind. And that is a pretty big chunk of the electorate and could make all the difference. I simply quote a distinguished Austrian academic, Martin Ruers, who has argued, and I quote his words, that continuing to insist on both unrestricted migration and equal access to national welfare states for EU workers has the potential to undermine the political sustainability of free movement because it does not take adequate account of important differences in the labour markets and welfare states across EU member states. Now that's an Austrian view, not a British view, but it happens to sum up our own thinking. And the final point I would make in these opening comments, I'll try and flesh out some of the detail later on in this discussion, is that, of course, this is a difficult area, but my experience of the European Union, and I have been involved in it since I was a member of the Doug Committee under Senator Doug of Ireland way back in the 1980s when I was Europe Minister. My experience of Europe is that when Europe looks for a solution, it finds solutions. When Europe is looking for a problem, it finds problems. And therefore, what I appeal to my colleagues around this table and in their respective governments is to see, right, this is an issue, it's a difficult one. Let's try and see how we can build on the fundamentals to reach a position which is acceptable, does not harm any other member state, but enables us, as a government in Britain, to recommend to our national citizens that when the referendum comes, our future should remain as part of the European Union. I think it's quite clear that's what the Prime Minister would like. That's what he hopes to be able to say. But, you know, in democracies, and we're all representing democracies around this table, it's not just the views of prime ministers and ministers that will determine this matter. It's the public. They have to be persuaded. At the moment, they are deeply divided in the United Kingdom. And I think the way we address these issues constructively and with a will to reach common solutions acceptable to all will maximize the prospects of the right answer. Thank you.
Sir Malcolm, thank you for laying that out brilliantly to cover everything that we needed to cover, and particularly for me, thank you for laying it out in time, which absolutely never happens, so I'm thrilled that we're off to a great start. We now would like to get some broad comments from our European interlocutors. I'm going to start with the Commission, the EU institutions. Sorry, you have the whole thing. Carol, you're in charge, and then we'll go on from there. Let me just add one thing, if you could add to your comments that I think Sir Malcolm brought up. Beyond speaking specifically about governments, he brought up the key point about your publics. And there are three possibilities here. Your publics are strongly with the British, they're strongly against it, or they don't care because they have other things to worry about at the moment. And I think that's an important point to make. There's a tremendous amount going on in Europe at the moment that also will play into this, and feel free to say that in an educational way. That's an honest and hopeful thing. But let's start with the EU institutions, and we'll move on from there.
Thank you. Let me first say that we, as the European Commission, we will try to find solutions. I think that's the role of the European Commission. On the one hand, of course, we have to defend the treaty, and we will do that vigorously. But the approach is also that we should find solutions. Now, let me very briefly go into the different topics. First of all, the Eurozone. There are now 9 countries, Sir Malcolm, that are out of the Eurozone, but in fact there is only one that has the right to stay out of the Eurozone. The other ones have the obligation, once they fulfill the conditions, to become a member of the Eurozone. Now, what cannot happen is that when it has to see with single market, that there should be consensus. I mean, the idea can never be that the European Union goes back to decision taken by consensus. I think there can be found solutions to this topic, but certainly not by introducing again consensus, because in fact it would come down to a veto by a minority, and that cannot happen. Secondly, on competitiveness, again, I believe we can find solutions to say that it should be binding on the Commission, that there is less legislation. Look, I'm not going to go into the details, but the reason that the European Commission has been proposing so many legislations is because the member states ask for it, you know. If the member states don't ask for it, the Commission are not going to propose that many legislation anymore. And by the way, it was very clear, for example, by Mr. Timmermans, that this is the direction they want to go. I've been in the Commission myself for some time, and it's all the time the member states that are asking for very complicated solutions. It's not the Commission, it is the other way around. On sovereignty, well, again, the idea of consensus, I think it's not, it doesn't bear fruit. I mean, we should go away from that. That doesn't make sense. That cannot happen. It will be completely against the treaty, by the way, and nobody knows how the treaty could be changed, by the way. Now, what you say is that the national parliaments are more, let's say, a pillar of the European Union than, for example, the European Parliament. My idea has always been, and I think also of the Commission, that you have 2 pillars of sovereignty. On the one hand, you have the direct election of the European Parliament. On the other hand, you have the indirect composition of the Council, where all parliaments are represented, and those Council of Ministers, governments are represented, and those governments are democratically elected by parliaments, by national parliaments. So it's not as if the national parliament is not represented at the European level. They are indirectly in the Council, and that's where they play their role. Now, having said this, I think there should be openness to give the national parliaments more a say in European matters, but not by becoming part of the decision-taking mechanism of the European Union, not adding another layer. What you can have is, and you already have it by the way now with the green card and the yellow card, that they can make a number of remarks and have a second reading and so on. And you could even consider that if a majority of the parliaments representing a majority of the population within a certain period of time is against, that then, well, it's, you're back to square one. But you cannot mingle the national parliaments in the European decision-taking system, because that simply would not work. Now, the ever closer union, you know, this is a theoretical discussion. And as a politician, I'm not really very much interested in that, because, well, first of all, it's the ever closer union of the peoples. We cannot be against that. And on the other hand, at any moment in time, member states will have to decide whether they agree to further integrate or not. So this is a philosophical problem, very interesting, but maybe not for today. Now, the last one, and there, if you allow me, Mr. Hulsman, I would like to have a couple more minutes to very precisely frame what it is really about. It's not about welfare benefits as a whole. There are a number of decisions by the Court of Justice that for the social security benefits, you can have a period, kind of a waiting period before a migrant worker has those benefits. There are decisions by the European Court of Justice on that, and even very recent ones. For example, the decision on Dano is one, and another on Alimanovic. So that can be settled. Where the real problem is what they call the in-work benefits. And that's outside the social security system. It's about tax cuts, for example, tax breaks for people that are working. And there you cannot discriminate. So you cannot have two people working in exactly the same position and being paid in a different way. That cannot happen, and it would be completely contrary to the European Treaty. That simply cannot work. So I think it would be good for the British government to be precise on that, and also not to amalgamate all this and give the impression to their own population that it's about the social security system. It is not. It's about a specific feature in Great Britain, the so-called in-work benefits. Now, is there a solution to that? Well, I've seen in the Anglo-Saxon press an idea of a safeguard or something like that. I don't know whether we can go into the details of that, but maybe there is a way. But first of all, there should also be the acceptance that we have to do things that stay inside the existing treaty.
Thank you very much. I have already 4 people to respond, and we have about 10 minutes, so please do the math. That's fine. Now, that's about 2 minutes a person. That's 5. I'd like to start with Stefan for Germany, please.
Before we go into details, I'd like to point out that I suggest there's a consensus that is worthwhile working on a better Europe. And it is nothing that the Brits opened this debate with the referendum, maybe a question whether it's a good path to walk on or not. It's everybody to his own decision, but there's a consensus. It's worthwhile working on a better Europe. Second consensus, I think we want you in. But this cannot be misinterpreted. That does not mean by all means. You have to understand both parts of this medal, and I'd like to clear that out as a basic statement, open these negotiations. A thing we excluded clearly is the issue of treaty changes. Yet, before we go into detail, we want to clarify there might be treaty changes, but I don't believe the treaty change, to start with the treaty change, would lead to the results close to the referendum. So we have to line up, for example, for intergovernmental elections, for improvements on a quite clear legal status. But if you want to ruin the debate, we can start with treaty changes at number one. We do not, and I'd like to share this view together with my French colleague, we do not exclude treaty changes, but there's much room for maneuver, improvement for a better Europe below this status. And finally, I'd like to point out there is a need for explanation why the British authorities, the UK government, is exposing the danger that the relevant and necessary and hopefully future relevant voice is trying to open this debate and leading to a success, maybe lose importance in the European game. I have found no argument yet which explains the UK position to expose to that danger to be not, I would say, a second class, but not so important member of the European integration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I hear from the Netherlands, please?
Yeah, thank you. And Malcolm, I want to start with this nice map here. You see in this version, the UK is in the center. But
It's a British map.
maybe this is your idea of open Europe. But we are very close on the other side of the North Sea, as the Netherlands. And there is a saying in the Netherlands that it's better to have a good neighbor than to have a far friend. But you are not only a close and a good neighbor, you are a close friend for the Dutch. And I have to say that goes back not just because you co-shaped European history some 70 years ago. It also has to do with the fact that we, both in the Netherlands and the UK, we love good football. It goes back to the idea that you send pop music to the European continent. The language that you speak here is now, without any legal binding, overwhelming Europe. We love you. We love you. You are a part of Europe. You are a founding part of Europe as it is now. So please come on, stay in the Union then also. You are a part of Europe. Now, on the points that you raised, we can go both ways. We can say, well, these are all UK problems, but we can also discuss whether to some extent these are also chances to deepen the European Union, chances to make the European Union stronger than it is nowadays. Let me give a few comments, only 2 comments on what that could mean for the points that you raised. I do not agree on all points, and I am with Karel de Gucht on the national parliament's roles. But you quoted one of my ministers that the days for an ever closer union are over. What do we mean by that? That ever closer is not a goal in itself. It should be the union, as you said rightly, of security, prosperity, and quality of life. And if we can do something good for our people, then we focus on these things and make it better. So that can mean that there is a multi-track. Some countries are going deeper than others when it comes to currency. Some countries go deeper than others when it comes to other issues. We are very pragmatic in that, and we have to set the rules that we respect each other, and of course there should not be any abuse of majority in that sense. Now, when it comes to the very delicate issue of migration, we see the sensitivity of the issue not just in the UK, but in most of the European countries, and also in our country, the Netherlands. But to react to that with something on a rational basis that can convince our people is not the right way, because the fears that our ordinary citizens have go much deeper. It has to do with all the insecurity that comes from globalization. And therefore, we need a very strong union. And on the issue of migration, I would say that you have a very particular system in the UK. You have these in-work benefits that none of us have. And we can agree that contribution-based, if workers pay premiums, you have no objection that they get a rise. But you have this particularity that in your system, you give in-work benefits because you think that is a fair thing. Now, if workers are free to move, then workers should be treated equal in each and every country of the European Union, so also in the UK. Malcolm, what is exactly what you want here?
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it to Italy. There are still 4 people who want to talk this time. Please keep it to 2 minutes. All right. Prime Minister Letta.
Thank you. 1 minute for a general statement of our position on the discussion we are having. And if I can, 1 minute to prepare the position that we will have in case of Brexit. That is important, you to know. Sir Malcolm. The first statement, we don't think that a cherry picking on this 4 point will bring us to a solution, to a successful solution. We have to know that the big picture is more important than the details. And when I say big picture, I think that, and this will be my position on the 4th point later on, the only solution is to go towards two-circle Europe with treaty changes, if it is necessary, but clearly saying that we take seriously your referendum and the ideas behind your referendum, and we move towards, for the first time, a clear two-circle Europe. One large circle sharing some policies, policies like the single market or foreign trade and other like that, and one, the core Europe, the Euro countries, with the greater integration as goal, leaving out the greater integration on the 28th circle. This is our general idea, and my position will follow this idea. Final point is about the discussion that we will have later on in case of Brexit. Italy is a country who wants to help the UK to stay in and who want to push UK to stay in. But if you go out, our position will be very clear, a position where the discussion on the issues, on the outcome, will be a discussion in which there's a big difference between being in and being out. It is not possible to being out thinking to being in. That is very important for me to say it before the discussion and before the referendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Spain, please, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. I would take 2 first words, political will and realism. Because it's true that when Europe, Great Britain has said that when Europe wants, we find solution, when there is political will. And I hope that there will be political will on all sides. I took a second word, which is citizens. The citizens of Spain, and I think it's not just the citizens of Spain, perceive that just Great Britain is taking a position, I would say, of strong negotiations just for the advantage. And that if this goes on, this would be unstoppable, that there would be other countries that would just, and that this would unravel the European project. So we want, yes, I fully support what Italy said. Spain wants Great Britain in. We, in particular, for instance, are pretty much pushing forward the importance of multilateral treaties, but as it was previously said, at any price. On the 4th issue, and we will address it, I was surprised nobody mentioned fraud. It is a matter of fraud, mainly. What makes our citizens, and not just in Great Britain, mad, is all the fraud that is being just under these positions. Let's speak about this. Let's not speak about migration, because this is not a problem of migration. It's mainly a problem of fraud. And there are solutions for that.
Thank you, that's fantastic. Sweden, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to answer your question first, how it is with the publics against or with the British people. And I think that I'm rather convinced about that the Swedish people would like the British people to be within the European Union and to go even further than what the Netherlands did. It's more to say that it would be an awful public divorce otherwise, because we love you and we think we are in this marriage together. and Sweden, UK, the Netherlands are very, very tight among the liberal countries, and we need your strong voice when it comes to more open trade. We need it also to have less stupid regulations, if I may say so. You are discussing the option then one in, one out. I would like to change that and said instead that we need to have more smart regulations. It's just a waste of time to count them. Do we have more or less? We need to have the smart ones. And one suggestion for that could be then that we start a commission and ask ourselves then from the beginning, like they do with the foreign policy in US, the State Department, each year they discuss that. What do we need for this? And we could do the same, but with companies then, and ask, what do we need? And which kind of legislation do we need to start a company in Europe? Just not to dig into more details, but to start from the beginning. And then of course also, I mean, we need you in the discussion about our competitiveness, how we can secure the energy market. That's one important thing. And I think my government want me to say a green energy market, so I do that. Also about digitalization, that I know Swedish companies are not that good at for the moment. We need to be much better in that throughout Europe. We have e-trade, we have a lot of free trade agreements that we need to finalize, not at least TTIP and CETA, where I know that UK think that this is really important. Just a small comment also on this ever closer union. I think that depends, of course, how you judge it. How you think about an ever closer union. And I think still that it could be a positive sentence if you think about what it can lead to. Ever closer union does not only mean more regulation and more legislation. It means also more competitiveness. It means more prosperity for all the people. I stop there.
Thank you. John, 2 minutes.
Ireland wants the UK to stay in the European Union because we don't look forward to having to have customs posts introduced in the border in Ireland, and possibly even passport controls where people pass from one part of Ireland to the other. The disruptive effect on the relations between these two islands and the peace we have established with the help of your government would be enormous. Secondly, we very much support David Cameron's statement that he wants the European Union to do more to fulfil its commitment to the free flow of goods, capital and services within the European Union. Do more. Unfortunately, some of the things that are being proposed go against that, in the sense the requirement for unanimity in the governance of the euro could conceivably mean that the EU could do less. Likewise, the introduction of the national parliaments as another hurdle over which the already complex process of EU legislation would also go against that requirement that David Cameron has put forward. As Ireland, we would be very worried that, let me be blunt about it, Irish people living and working here in Britain would lose access to the universal credit. We have had that in both directions long before either of us joined the European Union under the common travel area between Britain and Ireland. But as an EU member, I think you could not discriminate in favour of us, possibly, and against people from Poland. So we're worried about that. And a lot of our citizens will have a vote in the referendum, I should mention. Also, finally, if we do go to our bottom line to satisfy the UK in this case, can we be sure that you won't be coming back looking for more in 10 years' time?
40 years.
And, well, if every country had to re-examine if a marriage had to be reopened every 10 years or every so often, I don't think marriages would last at all. I would hope that this will be the end of the matter. if we do reach an agreement with you and you do vote to stay in, that the matter will not be reopened again, because we can't live with this sort of uncertainty. People are investing for very long periods, and they need to know what the political context will be in which their investments will be being returned. And if Britain's position in Europe is a matter of constant debate and angst, that's not good for investment.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Balcerowicz, please go on. And 2 minutes, thank you.
All right. Well, I should stress that I am not speaking, do not represent the present Polish government, but fortunately, on the issue of Britain in the European Union, there's a large consensus in Poland among the parties, and most of the Polish public is for Britain staying in the European Union. Now, on specifics. First, we are very much for strengthening the protection of non-Euro members against intrusive legislation, which would come proposals from the Eurozone. And we are ready to negotiate that. For example, it would be useful to establish what sorts of regulation cannot be justified by a single market. I think employment legislation had a very weak justification in the single market. Second, strengthening the role of national parliaments would help to guard against this danger of excessive regulation coming from the Eurozone and against excessive regulation in general. By the way, it would be useful for a British host to look at their own regulations, British regulations, for example, zoning. It is not European kind of regulation. Now, on the touchy subject of migration, I would like to make 3 points. First, the free movement of people is just untouchable. Second, I must say that many people in Poland feel offended by the accusations, which are untrue, then come to Britain just to misuse the social benefits. And I think British politicians should be more active against this untruth. There are data which show that the contribution they made to the British budget are much larger than what they draw. We are not interested in sending our people to Britain, but if they go, we want them to work. And not. Now, we would be ready to look and to negotiate around the rulings of the Court of Justice. I have the same rulings. I think the general makes sense. But we are against discrimination of people who work outside Poland. And finally, I would like to the negotiations about Britain staying in the European Union to have a broader area and to touch upon such things as liberalizing services. I think this is the British position too, because we would like European Union to be an engine for growth, and there are certain initiatives that are very important. So liberalizing services, certainly speeding up the conclusion of free trade agreements with other countries, including the United States, but there are some other countries, and we find a lot of justification in British demands. So let us use these negotiations to improve the European Union in such a way that also Britain would stay in the European Union.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. We're about to move on to the specifics, but before we do, 4 very quick points to make that were raised here that I think need to be added into what Sir Malcolm said that I think are great to make parameters come down to what you said. One, I think Stefan's comment, we want you in, but...
Can I say a word for France?
You can. Let me finish this and then 2 minutes, please. We want you in, but not under any conditions. I think that's a vital point to make. Okay. 2, the structure. Europeans care about the structure of the European Union, and this discussion in Britain, which won't look at it that way, has to be included because that's the way the Europeans think about everything. And without doing that, it won't work. So the Brits have to make the effort to understand that the structure in which these things will be dealt with at the Commission and the national level is absolutely vital in a policy way. 3, Prime Minister Letta's comment. There's a big difference between being in and out. I think a lot of people feel that way. This middle ground people are looking for won't work. You're either married or you're not married. And that has to be made clear. And then John's point, the last one to think about this, is this it? in terms of investment and political stability, given what's going on with the Euro crisis, what's going on with migration in Germany and other places in southern Germany where I live, and what's going on with globalization. That absolutely, that certitude has to be part of any deal. And that makes sense to me, that has to be addressed as we go. But yes, absolutely. France, 2 minutes, and then we specifically go on because we're late. Yes.
Thanks to give me the floor, the last one, because I agree that the French model, politically, economically, and socially, is quite different from the British one. As rightly said by Mr. Malcolm Rifkin, Europe for the British is a legacy not only of his, but also of Margaret Thatcher. So you have to deal with this legacy. France admires the British, and it dates back to Voltaire and Montesquieu, who were very, very Anglophile, I would say. But also, as said by the Prime Minister the day before yesterday, we think that the Brexit would be a disaster, first for the British people and then for Europe. But we won't reach a compromise because Mr. Cameron does not expect all his demands to be met, I think. He knows that compromise is the basis of the functioning of Europe. We won't have a compromise at any price. And I have 3 points to underline. First, the Eurozone. It has never been considered that the Eurozone would prevent the UK from having an access to the single market. And you didn't quote, I think, the best examples. You mentioned the clearing and settlement issue, which is ruled by the Court of Justice in March 2015, as you know. And the ECB lost this case because it asked the clearing and settlement banks to be in the Eurozone because the ECB is the lender of last resort. And this is, the solution is here. The second example has to do with the banking union, the supervisory mechanism, where the British, of course, mentioned rightly that it had an effect on the European Banking Authority in London, and we found a solution with a qualified majority voting. So we think that this case is really a good example where the union can find, with the British, a good solution, or the court has found a good solution. The second point is the ever closer union of peoples. It's not the American Constitution, we, the people. Victor Hugo wanted the United States of Europe. I can reassure you, unfortunately, in my life, I won't see it. I regret it very much. And you cannot, of course, ignore that Europe is has been first built for reasons of security and for reasons of peace. And this is key for the time being when there are so many security issues to be dealt with. So that's why the ever closer union of peoples is the expression which dates back to the 1957 treaty. And this expression was maintained in the treaty because the British wanted it in 1991 when you rejected the word federalism. So I think that the British were right at the moment, and they must stay in that right direction. And the third issue is the most difficult because it has to do with free circulation of workers and entrepreneurs. And as I said before, I think it's really the core of, we perhaps will reach a compromise. I think that with the German, we have a conversation in that respect. But you must understand that free market is not only for capitals, goods and services, it's also for workers. And if you raise this issue, as a French, I must say it's a bit dangerous because we have had the rejection of the referendum in 2005 because of the Polish plumber. And Polish plumbers in France are exceptional. They are very good workers, and everyone is very happy with them now. So I hope you are too.
And on the Polish plumber note, we're moving on to the specifics. We've changed the order slightly to correspond to what Sir Malcolm laid out, and I'd like him to respond to begin this again after having taken on all these points of view. I think that makes sense. Then we'll go back and dig down on this for about 20 minutes, so please be brief. So Malcolm, we're going to talk about economic governance, as you said to begin, Eurozone ins and outs and the specifics of that point. If you could, based upon what you've heard and the points made, then drill down on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to thank all my colleagues for what they have said, some of which reflects the problems that we have, but some of it also reflects the way in which we might be able to make progress. I was particularly pleased to hear, for example, our German colleague Stephen mentioning, and with French support, that you do not exclude treaty changes. It may not be necessary. I'm not sure any of us are very enthusiastic about treaty changes. It might require 29 referendums around the European Union, but nevertheless, treaty change is an important element that cannot be excluded, and that is something I welcome what you said. I also welcome our Dutch colleague's remark that he too takes the view, the Netherlands takes the view, that when we go for further integration, it should be on the basis that there's hard evidence that it will actually enhance the security, the prosperity, or the quality of life of our people. We're not doing it for ideological reasons, for visionary reasons. We're doing it because it actually is going to improve the quality of life. And to Enrico, speaking on behalf of Italy, I think it was very important the way you presented what may be the longer-term future. So often we hear the phrase, a two-speed Europe may be what we require. Two-speed is the wrong phrase. Two-speed implies you reach the same destination, you just get there a bit later. And I think the political reality, not just for the United Kingdom, perhaps for Sweden, perhaps for Denmark, perhaps for Poland, perhaps for a number of other countries, is there are some kinds of integration they will not wish to reach in the foreseeable future, if ever. And so your concept of a two-circle Europe is, I think, and let's not talk about inner or outer, just two different circles. But that brings me to the heart of how we deal with the Eurozone question, which is the first detailed point that you've asked me to comment on. Because the essence of this is that the single market is for all 29 countries. The Eurozone is 19 countries. And with respect to the Commission, while all the countries other than Britain may have some obligation to join the Eurozone, in the real world, some of them, even if they want to, aren't going to be members for the next 10, 20 years, perhaps even longer.
Let's see.
Well, let's see, but it's not an unrealistic possibility that it'll be a long time and there may be further enlargement.
Nothing is unrealistic.
The point I'm making is that for the foreseeable future, for a generation, there are going to be Eurozone countries and non-Eurozone countries in the European Union. That is reality. That's not just a British view. We all know that to be true. It is crucial, therefore, that either consciously or unconsciously, the Eurozone does not operate in a way that takes decisions for the Eurozone which also have an impact on the single market. That is the point. Now, representing the Commission, you made a perfectly fair point that the way to resolve that cannot be to go for consensus if that means you have to have every single country agreeing. But there are other ways you can move in that direction to reassure. And you can say, for example, the United Kingdom has suggested this could be a way forward, that if you have a proposal emanating from the Eurozone countries, because what we are concerned about is caucusing, a predetermined majority where, although there's lip service paid to all the other countries being involved in the debate, in fact, the decision's been taken in advance by the Eurozone countries. And nobody will admit that, but we know in the real world that is sometimes how people get together and discuss during a negotiation. So we have to avoid that as being even a hypothetical possibility. And the way we have suggested, and others I think have suggested, is let us say of the 9 non-Eurozone countries, if, for example, 3 of these countries make an objection to what is being proposed, then that will operate as a sort of emergency brake. It will impose an obligation, rather like your Nanina compromise, but building on that, slightly stronger than that. It will impose an obligation on the Union as a whole to try to work towards a consensus, to seek to take into account the concerns of the non-Eurozone countries, but it has to do so in a real way. Because the very first time, then that was ignored. I cannot believe that all 9 non-Eurozone countries would not protest with deep, deep resentment at any attempt to make changes to the single market that was not done on an equal basis by all the member states. So let us explore, by all means, ways of doing it. I've suggested that one way would be if 3 of the non-Eurozone countries object, then that should change the procedure, not to trying to get 100% agreement, but trying to ensure that the concerns of non-Eurozone countries are equally taken into account. That is not a destructive, that is a constructive view, which I hope will appeal to colleagues.
Just jumping in, and I'd like you all to comment as we get this weekend. There was some movement on this issue, as you know, in the newspapers about Sherpas beginning to work out. Could there be something between these two positions, between consensus is not on the table, yes, but the caucusing issue, could several countries and percentages were being discussed, which is rather different. Let me start with France and then on to Germany.
Just a point, the French at present, the French government does not favor a treaty change. We'll see. We are not, we think that the British should renounce to this demand. Sure. Then we'll see, because compromise, as I said, is the core of the functioning of Europe. With regard to the Eurozone, on the contrary, how is it that the British could stop the Eurozone integration? And have you got examples of subject matters which would endanger the interest of the UK with regard to the Eurozone? Because the competences are very, very limited.
If the Eurozone is simply discussing the future of the Eurozone, that's none of our business. We can offer an opinion, but we have no right to try and stop that, nor do we wish. We wish the Eurozone success. It will be beneficial to the whole of Europe, including the non-Eurozone members, if the Eurozone gets back on the right track and is strong and successful. That is not a problem. The concern, inevitably, is if you have a group of countries who are the Eurozone countries, meeting constantly, meeting regularly, without the other member states, what appears on their agenda?
This is not right.
It may not be what happens at the moment. We're not talking just about today and tomorrow. We're talking about a structure, because if Enrico's suggestion of a two-circle Europe is where we're facing, then the single market isn't part of those two circles. That is the whole 29.
Let's start with Germany and then Italy. First to Germany.
So, Malcolm, you just said before in a previous statement, this is not a theoretical but a practical problem, the ins and out question. Practically spoken, this is not a right description that there's not a coordination between the ins and out. If you go to a Eurogroup meeting, the next morning, the ECOFIN is debriefed. There's an intense cooperation between the ins and out. And if you see the issues like banking union, this is a public good. The stability of the Eurozone is delivering stability to the UK as well. And we are not asking you whether the decisions within you two are on the Bank of England or something like that, which is in the ECB is independent, maybe a bad example, which has a negative impact on others, just to give us a veto. But on banking union, on the ESM, on the all issues on the two-pack and the supervision, we have intense collaboration. So it is not just, it is not practically, as you said, it's a practical, we have practical solutions for that. Therefore, actually, my French colleague asked you to give more, this is a non-public debate, so we can be frank, to give us more examples on the issues. And I'd like to finish with Capital Markets Union. Hey, this is the British example where you brought something on the floor, your commission is making a proposal, where the Eurozone members wouldn't have said, this is the first thing we would have organized when we woke up this morning. But we see that this is for the non-Euro group members, a crucial issue. And what was our response? Let's go into that, see that as after banking union and after intense Eurozone integration as another big project. So practically, Malcolm, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about if we said so. And if you want to join us, okay, we are not discriminating people who want to join us. If you want to participate in the Eurogroup, there are regulations to join. But if you do want to stay out, we have the highest respect for your needs, and we have intense collaboration practically. So where is the problem, please?
Right, Italy, please.
First of all, I welcome your point on two-circle Europe. I think it is the solution, is the only possible solution. When in trouble, go big, you say, and I think is exactly the solution. One point it is not your problem to have the Euro countries and the non-Euro countries. It is also our problem. I mentioned the problem of the Parliament. We have a sort of European Westlothian question. Because when the president of the European Central Bank goes to the Parliament, to his Parliament, he has in front of him also the British European Member of Parliament in the European Parliament. That is not the case for the President of Bank of England. He has only the British Member of Parliament towards him. So to find a solution to this very, very complicated issue, it is also our own interest. This is why I say the Italian position has been usually, I hope also now, but usually the position to support the European institutions as first priority. And this is why I think, and I propose here, to ask the European institutions to find a proposal and to come here with a proposal. But I know that it is not enough to say the European institutions, so I try to be a little bit flexible. When I say the European institution, I propose, for instance, to the European Commission to be in a group of people working to a solution, having the commissioner, the British commissioner, representing the European Commission there. Mr. Hill, I think, is the right person, knowing both the problems of the European Commission, but also the issues of the UK today, with a representative of the European Central Bank and with maybe Mr. Dijsselbloem, a representative of the Eurogroup, creating a sort of groupe de sages like that, asking them to find a possible solution, not to have these possible negative consequences on both sides, and to bring to us a possible solution on the problem of the euro could be, in my view, a good step to find a concrete solution.
Thank you. Spain, please.
Well, it's easy for me to intervene now because I really agree with what has been said. Also with the perspective that Spanish policy towards the European Union has been quite stable through governments, and I hope it will continue like that. I think that we all agree that this is a common problem. For United Kingdom, the euro, so that the euro is just functioning and functioning well is a priority. And for everybody also, the internal market is a priority. The devil is in the details. And there I will go to, I think that there's a working party, there's groupe de sages, that's a very good idea so that people can reflect outside the box and bring solutions. Because I will refer to a sentence in the President of the Union response. He says that we have to organize a system that takes into account the concerns of the non-Euro members. But frankly, Malcolm, you have mentioned Ioannina. The moment you mention Ioannina or you mention Luxembourg, you will have les boucliers. So, there will be, this is how it happens. In the end, we need to negotiate without these prejudices that this mechanism has to be Ioannina. No, let's find a suitable mechanism, because we cannot, of course, we cannot just make that the United Kingdom just stops an integration. And banking union has been mentioned, because you think that, let's just go into the nitty-gritty of the details and find a suitable mechanism, and the President Tusk's letter just points into that direction.
Thank you very much. On to Ireland. Thank you.
I think we've seen from the experience of the economic crisis that the Eurozone authorities in some instances have to move extremely quickly to take action, for example, over a weekend. Therefore, we do not need to overcomplicate the decision-making process. And if they have to take into account whatever British protocol as well as making the substantive decision, that could slow things down to the detriment of everybody. Malcolm mentioned Greece in his earlier intervention. When the European institutions stepped in to rescue Greece, they were in effect rescuing banks, including British banks and American banks, not just German banks. Right. So there is a natural sense of unhappiness that Germany is expected to foot the bill or foot the risk, when it's in fact the banks of other countries that are also benefiting from this. So I think the success of the European economy, Eurozone and non-Eurozone, is a matter of solidarity in which the UK has just as much interest as everybody else. I think the best solution would be if you could list precisely the things that you want some special protection for, yes. Not some sort of general break. We wouldn't like, for example, this to be used as an excuse to stop a common deposit insurance scheme for the banking system, because that's one of the great incompletenesses of the Eurozone. And we would be worried, for example, that Germany might hide behind you in its attempts to stop this, which wouldn't be good, and it might be
John,
what
you are
you'd want.
getting unfair now.
Of course I'm going to be unfair. But anyway, I'll stop with that.
Can I just comment on that?
Unfair.
Okay.
On that point immediately, I don't think it's realistic to expect us to anticipate future discussions on future proposals. So we can't give a list now as if somehow we know everything.
I think it is fair.
No,
You have to give examples.
Of course, but what we are saying is that on any proposal that affects the whole single market, you cannot have even the possibility of the Eurozone countries caucusing, making up their mind in their own meetings, and then presenting what would in effect be.
But now you're talking about the theoretical question.
Yeah.
You just pointed out in your first statement that's a pragmatic.
No, we're talking about power.
You have the best diplomatic service probably in the world, and they have tremendous ability to anticipate what other people are going to do, and to make sure that nothing is done to your disadvantage.
By the way,
you don't
Malcolm,
need these protections.
So Malcolm, do you want that break to be a break where the UK can, which the UK can control, or should that break also be controlled by Greece, Romania, Hungary, etc.? So do you want this single market to be stopped?
On the contrary, we want the single market to be expanded. But what we want to ensure is that decisions that affect the whole single market are not taken by those countries in the Eurozone in the interests of the Eurozone.
But are you aware that your proposal gives a break to every other three?
No, what we suggest, look, the point I made, and I started off by making this, and it's a fundamental point. At the moment, it so happens Eurozone countries by themselves already are more than the 65% normal qualified majority.
But what harm did they do?
Now, hold on. I gave certain examples. I can repeat for example.
You can't.
All right, I won't repeat them. I haven't got time to do so. fair comment. I don't need to repeat them.
So you try to find an umbrella, but the rain is not coming.
What I have said. Sorry, no. I'm sorry. This is a process which is relatively recent, where Eurozone countries are now meeting quite properly.
What are you afraid of?
I'll tell you what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of, for example, it happened to be the European Central Bank. It could just as equally have been Eurozone countries
But do you really
taking decisions which damage, for example, the City of London as a financial center.
But don't you believe that on the question of austerity, for example,
I'm sorry?
the German, let's take the question of austerity. That probably we're much closer as a German and as a UK government than to some other governments around this table. So the question on which economic level playing field we are playing has not just only to do with the question in which currency we do pay. These are competing economic philosophies and strategies which probably cannot be regulated by treaty changes or other legal instruments. These are competing values.
I want to get the EU institution in and then have Sir Malcolm talk, and then we've got to move on. Okay, that's simple. EU institution, please, briefly.
Well, I will really try to be very brief, but the single market, Enrico, is also about the free movement of workers. And Sir Malcolm should also realize that. You cannot take the free movement of workers out of the single market.
I agree
so
with
you
that.
cannot be for an extension of the single market and be against the free movement of workers. So that's a real conundrum.
You're preaching to the converted.
No, I'm not.
I have no problem.
I'm not, because you are asking for an exception that in-work benefits.
No, but we're not talking about that just
them.
now. We'll come to that.
No, but that's about the single market. The single market is also about the free movement of workers.
And I've got an answer to that.
There, our Polish friend is right. Secondly, treaty change. Well, the Commission isn't against either, but we should realize what we are talking about. What we can be talking about is a specific change on a specific article, for example, together with a next enlargement treaty and ratification process. The idea that we would have an overall revision of the treaties, I think that's not on the table, because it's simply not feasible. And then I would like to come back to Enrico. The idea of two circles, then you have to make a completely new treaty, because the whole treaty is conceived, possibly, yes, to speed, but the same goal. If you change it, then you have to really make a new treaty, and it would be a very difficult one, because certain countries would be in circle one for this matter and not for another matter. So it would not be a line. You could not have 7 or whatever countries that agree to everything. No, that this would be a piecemeal, and we would never get out of it. Last remark. The whole Unanina question, because let's try to be practical. This is something that is on the table, no? In the real negotiations. You have different versions, possible versions of Unanina. You can have it in a way that it's kind of a Luxembourg veto. Nobody would ever accept that. Would everybody be against also if it was...
Jean-Claude may be thinking of it.
Excuse me?
Jean-Claude Juncker may be thinking of it.
But what I mean is, you could also have a Unanina, a new one, whereby it's kind of a timeout for a limited period of time, allowing for further consultations and possibly negotiations. That's something else. But I think we shouldn't call it Unanina, because that has a very bad smell, you know, in the mouths of several people around the table. And then I would have a specific question to Sir Malcolm. You know that in the Anglo-Saxon press, the idea of a safeguard mechanism with respect to in-work benefits has been rumored. What are your ideas on that?
If you don't mind, I'll comment on that when we come to that subject for our discussion later on.
I appreciate that. Good. I just want to say we've reached the predictable problem that we always reach in these meetings. We're talking about a mixture of mechanisms, policy, and power, as though they were separate, and of course they're not. The only way this can work is if they go together and all have to be discussed. The Anglo-Saxons like to talk about power. The Continentals talk about mechanisms. There's overlap here between these things, but unless we bring both of these on board, as you're saying, and bring people along, you're not going to get to policy, and without getting to policy, we don't get to answers. So as we go, if you think of the other guy's point of view here, I think that would be helpful, because you're all right, and that's the problem. You're all wrong. Moving on to the next topic quickly, we have 15 minutes to the break, so we have to get this one in. Competitiveness, which we've done. We've changed the order in line with Sir Malcolm's comments, which works perfectly. Looking at national parliaments and the internal market in that system. Sir Malcolm, if you can kick us off, and please keep it to 3
I'll
to
keep
5
it very, very
minutes,
brief.
I want involvement from and we start with France this time.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it very, very brief, because the issues are really very simple, and I don't think should divide us in a significant way. The first one is with regard to the actual burden on all countries of the cumulative burden of EU directives. We've calculated in the United Kingdom, this is purely in the United Kingdom, the cumulative cost of 100 of the most burdensome EU regulations each year is about £33 billion. It's a very substantial sum. So there is a political will to have that burden reduced. Our proposal, our main proposal, would simply be that when a plan has been determined, it should be binding on the Commission. Because there has been so much lip service paid to this over the years.
Binding on us?
Binding on the Commission.
What?
When a plan has been determined for reducing over a period of time.
By whom?
By the member states.
Oh, member states.
By the member states, because the point, if you let me finish, so much that has happened in the past is everyone has paid lip service to the need to reduce bureaucracy and so forth. In practice, it has very rarely happened, except in a few symbolic ways. And it may be no more fruitful on this occasion. I'm not naively optimistic. What I'm saying is we are trying to identify a mechanism to ensure that the Commission treats it with top priority. This is not a marginal issue affecting only Britain, it affects every member state. It damages our competitiveness, and what we're seeking to do is to find a way, and I hope you would agree from the Commission's point of view, this is not a dishonourable objective, that the Commission, when it decides what its priorities are, it perhaps has not given top priority in the past to actually removing some of its previous achievements that have not been so
I really have to
successful.
intervene here, Sir Malcolm, with due respect, but this is not fair. If the European Commission proposes something and the Council is against, they just vote it down, you know. It's not up to the Council to say what we can do, what the Commission can do. If you don't like it, you simply vote it down in the Parliament and in the Council, and it's off the table. So if a legislation comes about, a directive comes about, it's because a majority of the member states and a majority of the European Parliament are in favour of it.
I understand that. I understand that. The point I'm making, though, is not the original...
Sometimes including the UK.
I'm not referring to the original decision to introduce the directive. You're quite right in the way you described the procedure. Sometimes in the light of experience over the years that follow, many take the view that the effect of these directives has been more of a nuisance, has been more of a problem than a benefit. Historically, the Commission have been very reluctant to agree that any directive that was approved in the past should be. There have been examples when that's happened. I'm not saying it never happens.
More and more.
But Malcolm,
more and more, and we want to make it even more.
But Malcolm, can you explain to the British people that the Commission is not the legislator? Because if you tell the British people that the Commission is the legislator,
it's
then
not true.
the political power which you represent
I didn't say that.
cannot respond, and there is no accountability.
I entirely accept.
It's done in almost all of our countries.
Sure, but
and this is really evil for Europe.
No, but
It's
the priority
the end
that
of
the
Europe.
Commission give, not just to new directives, but to examining the value of previous impositions on industry and business.
You must explain to the people the truth of the functioning of Europe. I think it should be done in France as well, but you should do this, because otherwise you'll have big problems with the referendum.
Sure.
Now, can you amplify that for a second? What is the truth?
The truth is that there is a money method, which means that the Commission has the monopoly of initiative legislation. But the money method doesn't work as well as it did when Europe worked much better than it does now. So the Commission, after having consulted in a very, very extensive manner with the project on the website, and everyone, even each citizen, be able to answer, and the British are very proactive in this respect, I must say. So there are very, very extensive consultation, then there is a text, and then the political power has the decision. So you must say that to the people, because otherwise, if you say that Europe is the enemy, and especially the Commission does what it wants against the states, which is not true, and I would like to know how many directive and regulation you opposed that were adopted finally. Have you got the percentage?
If you had given me advance notice of that question, I would have found the answer, but I don't have it in my head. I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
About striking down legislation, which I think is the topic now, and two things. First is that this Commission, the Juncker Commission, has of legislation that was on the table, and you asked the MEPs, the members of the European Parliament, that suddenly found that they had no job, in the sense that there was no report because all these proposals were withdrawn. So that's the first thing. And the second issue that Noel pointed out is that we have to all take our responsibilities. I have chaired the Legal Affairs Committee of the European Parliament before being part of the European Council as Foreign Affairs Minister. And you know what? How many Brits would come to strike down legislation? Not many. How many Brits would come to have a directive on the well-being of the animals in the zoos?
Many.
Frankly, many.
Many.
So let's call a cat and let's take our responsibilities.
And I want to add that the free market is a direct byproduct of law. And most of the texts which are opposed by the French population, as you know, we are with the market economy, we have to make improvements. I agree, thanks to the British. But most of these texts are for liberalization. You have the telecom package, you have the portuaire services, etc., etc. It's all about liberalization. especially the directive on services.
Okay.
Free market and law are really married or combined.
Okay. For Sweden and then Germany, and then we'll take just a couple more, and we've got to move on. Sweden and then Germany.
Well, just very brief then. The problem with the EU directives, it's absolutely not the Commission, it's not the European Council, it's not the Parliament. It is the implementation. And that one is tremendously slow. Sometimes just think about the Services Directive, where the EU Commission tried to push with both carrots and sticks. But it will still not go faster than the weakest member state. And that's just to realize. And we are just getting more and more countries within the European Union, so it won't go faster. But don't say that it is the Commission, because it isn't. It's us.
Germany.
We're talking about competitiveness and liberalizing the market. So, but I'd like to add to the debate, and if I talk to UK counterparts, sometimes it seems not to be so aware that the EU is the UK biggest investment partner, for example, on cross-border investment in both ways. So the market seems to work quite properly. So foreign investors own, due to Bank of England figures, 10.6 trillion of UK assets, which is 5 times UK GDP, and UK investors own 10.2 trillion of foreign assets. If you look on trade, you're bloody successful.
That's not what we're discussing. I don't have to disagree with that.
This is something where we should work on. I think there's a general assumption around this table. Then she would intensify with new issues like the telecommunication one. Günther Oettinger is working hard on that, and other issues. And this will enhance the competitiveness within the EU. So we shall find in our conversation or negotiations a communication that reveals that we achieved much, but there's room for maneuver improving, and we will find common ground on that one. And I think the EU integration is based on enhancing competitiveness, on deepening the single market for goods, service, labor, and capital, for everything. So don't give a picture to the UK population. They might misguide it in a way that we haven't been achieved much in the last decade.
I want to just respond very briefly to that point. I agree with virtually everything you've said, Stephen. What I'm saying is that in each of our countries there are two traditions. There's a bureaucratic tradition, there's a free market tradition. And each have their role. You can't eliminate one or the other, obviously. But if we get beyond the politicians, in each of our countries, speak to businesses, small businesses as well as large businesses, and ask them whether they feel that the bureaucratic constraints that have been imposed have all been to the benefit of competitiveness and to the benefit of creating prosperity. And without exception, in Germany and France, in every country around this table, small businessmen as well as big businessmen will say, we are being suffocated by too many EU directives. Now, I'm not saying there can't be, a single market will require many of them. Of course, most of them cannot be eliminated without destroying the single market. But that's not the same as saying that a directive once imposed has to be there forever.
But don't blame
Must
the
be
EU
in the benefit of the
institution
country.
for sometimes driven by national interest.
Maybe. I'm not blaming the European
interest legislation. You will find many of these EU regulations who are not invented in Brussels, but in one of the more than 20,
but they may still be lousy regulations.
Also
they may still be lousy regulations. That you
Also
get
in
rid of.
Great Britain, by the way.
We're moving
Sir
on.
Malcolm,
The Netherlands
also in Great
and
Britain.
Ireland.
Okay. We are quarreling a lot about issue number.
Yes. That's what we're here for.
It is the issue of competitiveness, and from all the issues that Cameron laid on the table, the competitiveness is the easy one.
That's right.
Let's just say that.
That's right.
But said that, we first of all have to get rid of the idea that Brussels is a power on its own. What Brussels is doing, they are acting on our behalf. And the City of London has more officials, has more public administration workers than the whole European Union altogether. So it is not that big. It is actually small for what it has to do. So what, of course, all these rules that we have were once designed to make markets properly work. Nobody is a fan of bureaucracy, and nobody invents bureaucracy for its own sake. It was all invented to make markets work. And then, of course, we can say, okay, that is the number one thing we have to do. Bureaucracy needs maintenance. Bureaucracy needs maintenance. That's number one. And we can easily agree on it. And if this is something that helps you and that helps your voters, fine. We are all as lead as the Netherlands, but I think we all. Number two, competitiveness needs free trade agreements outside the European Union. And that is where we need you to stay in, to make full power, to make the best of our competitive potential, so to say, to the broader world of globalization. So that is number two. Let's invest. So let's maintain bureaucracy maintenance, renovate or whatever. Bureaucracy, number two. Let's go for trade agreements as broad as we can get them. It's in our common interest. And number three, let us deepen the internal single market where it is not finished. And we can talk about services, but the unleashed potential of a further deepening of the internal market is also, that could be on the agenda. And then we have three magic points: less bureaucracy, more free trade agreements, and deepen the internal market. If that is something to agree upon, I think it's the least difficult issue.
Okay. John, very briefly, we have about 3 minutes to go, and then 1 minute for Poland, then we're done.
I agree with what Hart has just said. Britain is a service exporter rather than a goods exporter. Therefore, Britain has a vested interest in ensuring that we have a single market in services, which requires more EU laws to be made, not less, to ensure that we can replace the 28 different laws we have on different subjects across Europe with a single European rule. To my mind, it would be better for Britain to be able to export its services throughout Europe with a single European rule than to have to deal with 28 different rules for those same services. And that, in my view, is what Britain should be aiming for. Not putting an obstacle in the way of EU legislation in this area, but facilitating it. Finally, I agree very much with what Anna just said. The problem in terms of over-regulation comes from political compromises reached between the Parliament and the Council in the passage of legislation.
Yep.
Frequently, in particular in the Parliament, where the members don't have to sustain a government in office, their voting records are not scrutinised particularly, and they can insist on almost anything they like. If British MEPs are not present in those discussions, as sometimes they're not, on principle, then you will expect to have overcomplicated regulation. So it's very important that Britain elects to the European Parliament people who believe in the simplicity of regulation and who resist these artificial compromises that are sometimes imposed against its wish on the Commission. The Commission is not the origin of complication. It's the interaction between the Council and the Parliament that is the origin of much of the over-elaboration.
Sometimes we are also at the origin of complication, and I think we are now doing something about it. But you're right, John, that it's merely the legislative process that makes it more complicated. But we also have some sins, you know.
Okay, Poland, 1 minute, and I mean
1 minute. In the case of Brexit, Britain would not be free of European regulations like Switzerland or Norway. And I don't think it is realistic for Britain to accept a better treatment than in the case of these countries. This would be very unfair. This is the British notion. Right. Fairness. Okay. While, so there would be no impact. You would get the regulation without any impact on regulations. Right. But if you stay, you would have less regulations.
Right. We have 2 minutes before the break, and I'm just going to make 3 brief points. I like that we got to who is in charge and how does the UK want that changed. It's a fundamental point. Is the Commission in charge? Is the Council in charge? Is Germany, France in charge? Who's in charge? If you want political change, you have to tell me where political power lies. And we're grappling, we're dancing around this. But without that, you can't get there. And I think that's great that we did that. 2, if competitiveness is the easy one, and I agree with you that it is, I look forward to the hard ones later this afternoon. Because it will get more dicey. And I think if the audience sees that, it is not easy to negotiate this with 28 separate national interests plus a European interest. It's just not. And to assume that any of this will be easy if Britain stays in or out is to live in a fantasy world or read one of the newspapers that one reads today. And then last, I'm glad that we grappled with services, because specifically for the UK, this is a vital thing because of the UK's dominance in services in the world. It's a dominant power. And so obviously that plays into what goes on in Europe in a fundamental way. I will talk about that more this afternoon even, but I think it's vital that we mention it now, because I think that gets to a contradiction that's really, from a continental point of view, makes perfect sense, and that must be answered. And I'd like to thank the audience and the panel for blessedly keeping to time. We will have a 15-minute break, and then we will get down to the harder ones. Thanks very much.